Well, welcome everyone. We are live on Ustream and here at Barnes & Noble Marina Del Rey with Michelle Phillips, Mamas and Papas, and Robin Aiello, co-author with Michelle of an upcoming biopic about Mamas and Papas. My name is David Kuka. I'm the author of Children of the Canyon, a novel about a boy growing up in the Laurel Canyon era in the 1970s as the counterculture is coming to an end. And Michelle, in my book, I try to observe the Laurel Canyon era through the eyes of a child and to chronicle the parenting culture that I'm sure must seem pretty alien to a lot of contemporary parents. Given your eminence as a mama in two relevant capacities, and as well as the fact that your children now have their own children, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to raise children in that environment, and maybe compare and contrast some of that with today's parenting experience?
Well, you should have seen the way I was raised. It was nothing like Laurel Canyon, and my father was much more progressive and
Really?
much more liberal and much less fanatic about knowing where we were all the time. That included during school. We lived in Mexico City, and we were allowed to do pretty much as we pleased, and that turned out to be a very good thing for me. I was very happy to just go to school when I wanted to, or But in Laurel Canyon, I didn't raise any of my children in Laurel Canyon.
Right, yeah.
I went straight to Bel Air.
You went to Bel Air, yeah. You and John went to, but.
Yeah, I think that there was a feeling during the 60s that, children should be freer, certainly freer than the 50s, and have a chance to express themselves more. My daughter China went to Montessori, where she was allowed to roam the halls if that's what she wanted to do, and she turned out okay.
Yeah.
It was just very laid back, very
Discovery learning.
Discovery learning, yeah.
Discovery
Remember
learning.
that term?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
do you see that maybe, I know as a product of the era, so China's a contemporary of mine, so I remember very much. And I see a lot of, some of my generation, certainly some of the ones who grew up in more free-form homes, reacting a little bit similar. Do you see that as being the case in some with China's in my generation as well, from your perspective, from your vantage point?
What was the question?
Do you see, like, in other words, maybe kind of a reaction to some of the more relaxed attitudes about that?
Yeah, well, China has her children doing something every moment of the day. It's guitar lessons, or piano lessons, or dance lessons, or horseback riding, or it's very structured, and that works for them. They live in Montecito, and
No TV.
they have no
No
TV.
TV, cool.
And I didn't have any TV when I was growing up either, ever. And China doesn't realize that her mode of parenting, in a way, is very similar to mine,
Hmm.
or to my father's. The kids get to do what they want, but they don't get to sit in front of a TV and watch stupid television or movies one after the next. They don't have that. They read and they play outside, and they have activities, a lot of activities.
But yes, yeah, but the good kinds of activities. It sounds like, even though they're structured, it sounds very much like.
Well, it's stuff that they love to do.
They love to do.
My grandson plays a lot of sports, and he's very good, excellent basketball player, and a great. Is that my phone?
No. It's
It
some
is.
background. It is?
It is.
Oh,
I wonder who it is.
Oh.
We don't care.
You don't care.
They'll go away in a
They'll go
minute,
away. They'll come
and then
back.
I'll turn the phone off. Yeah, he plays baseball and he plays basketball, and my granddaughter plays statewide volleyball, and my
She's
youngest
great.
granddaughter is equestrian, and she has two walls full of ribbons, and they all excel at the things that they like to do.
But it sounds very freedom-based, exploration-oriented and whatnot. Speaking of which,
But when China was a little girl, she people wanted her to be in their movies, and I can't tell you how many times people, even Orson Welles, said, let her be in my movie. I said, no, she can't. I don't let her work. And China was just heartbroken about this. But I said, you can take any class, any guitar, tap, vocal, drama, any ballet. She was very much into ballet. And when you're 18 years old, I will become the stage mother from hell if that's what you want. But you can't work until you're 18. And so she was very prepared when she went out into the world. She could sing and dance and write songs, and she excelled from the first minute she walked out the door.
because she hadn't been thrust in it so early, and you're right, you gave her the proper background.
Well, I really don't believe in children working in the business. It's people are, I think parents are very, very misguided to allow their children to work in the business, because it's awful what they do to kids.
It can be awful what they do to adults.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're ostensibly fully formed at that point. Michael Walker, who wrote this incredible book about Laurel Canyon, which I urge all of you guys to read, it was indispensable for me, certainly from writing my book. One of the points when I had the occasion to interview him, he made was about the folkies and how so much of the Canyon's musical ethos was informed by a lot of folk singers, like you guys who had come from New York. Could you talk a little bit maybe about, I mean, certainly your song Creek Alley tells a lot of the story, which we were
Right.
discussing before we started here. Could you talk about how the folkier Muggums became the Mamas and Papas, but can you maybe speak a little bit about what the folk scene was like in the early 60s, and any parallels you saw to what came out of Laurel Canyon and what came out of, in general, the music of the 60s and 70s that you were so part of?
Well, let's face it, everybody wants to be a part of what is selling. Everyone wanted to chart. And, if you, John was not singing folk originally, he was singing jazz.
Mm.
And the Smoothies, the Journeymen, the Abstracts, those were three groups that John was in before. He was trying to do what was commercial at the time. But then when the Kingston Trio came along and made, well, they called it folk music, that started a whole revolution, really. And Bob Dylan, and all of a sudden American folk music had some cachet, and they were selling records, and Peter, Paul, and Mary came along, and they were selling a lot of records, and so John just started to fashion his writing more towards folk music, and that was also something very new for performers to be writing their own songs.
Right.
And that was a really big deal when that started to happen. John found that writing songs came very easily to him, and especially if he was in the genre that he was looking for,
Right.
and, if he wanted to. Like there's a Mamas and Papas song, a little ditty called "Once Was the Time I Thought," and that's definitely what was the name of that great group? They were not the Swingle Singers, but something and Ross.
Oh, Hendricks and Ross.
Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. And this was directly influenced by Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. But and John was just showing off, really, just to show the audience that he could still write that kind of material. We did it a cappella, and it was all this very intricate harmony, and it was a great moment where he could really show that he could do that. But he knew that he wanted to get into folk music, and he started writing folk songs. What he was doing a lot of was taking old American folk songs, writing them a little bit. Talk about blurred lines.
Oh.
And then he would, make it a John Phillips written song. So that's when he formed the Journeymen, and he and Dick Weissman would write songs for the Journeymen, and they were recording on Capitol. They were a pretty big deal, and or at least they thought they were. And then when Dave Guard left the Kingston Trio, Bob Shane and Dave Guard, Bob Shane, and Nick Reynolds, thank you, asked him if he could replace Dave Guard in the Kingston Trio. And by this time we had just started to date, and I was amazed that he said no. The Kingston Trio were the biggest group in the United States and worldwide maybe. And he said, no, I'm gonna put my own group together and we're gonna be really good. And I think people were really amazed at the audacity of not taking that job. But he didn't want to replace anyone. He wanted to be the leader, and he wanted to pick the songs, and he wanted to write for them. And that's how I got into the Journeymen.
And arranging too.
And arranging
He's
is
such a strong suit in arranging everything. It would have been very hard to join that group and become the arranger.
Right. Well, it's such a testimony to him as a visionary, to see that he wanted to do more than just, again, filling in and being he didn't want to be he wanted to be the founder, as opposed to just a conventional person who could fit a slot that that he probably saw plenty of people could slip
and fun, experimental and
right.
fun.
This
was so fun for him. I mean, this was.
Oh, he lived for it.
They were bebopping on the corner in his neighborhood when he was growing up. I mean, this was like rap. It was really young for them and really fun. So it was kind of going back to that, time period in his life where they created.
Yeah, and that's all he did all day long. He had his guitar strapped to him, and he was always just trying to work out in his head. He was trying to work out another part with that other part, and that was his life.
And you see that the country's moods, and what tends to become mainstream very often in one era wouldn't necessarily work in another era. I mean, America was ready, obviously, to allow the folk to really hit mainstream, which was not the case 10 years before, and might likely wouldn't have been the case 10 years later. But the time was absolutely perfect.
And the cool thing was the Hootenanny tour, which brought it to colleges, which was the first time that was happening.
Well, when people heard Kumbaya, that was it.
The way at the college, it was a wild
And
part.
it kind of helped the sing-along thing, too.
Yeah.
The sing-along era. Which, because their parents had Lester Lannon and the whole, that whole era. But then it became something for the kids, too. I mean, there was a lot of, I remember everyone in the I was born in the '60s, but I remember everyone had guitars.
Right.
You could
Right.
always, rustle up a little group on the corner.
Well, this was also a time when music was taught in schools, and so everyone played an instrument, or they were in the glee club, or they were in music appreciation classes. That created a whole generation of kids who could play.
Right.
I was first cellist in my junior high school.
No, but you're right, and it was something that our parents. I mean, I remember in my very crunchy preschool that I was asked to leave. If you can go and talk about parenting issues, it's stories in the book as well. Yeah, I was actually asked to leave my preschool because I was deemed an anxiety case because I wanted to read a book in first grade, and I was my parents were called. The alarms were summoned, and they said, "We have a real problem child here who wants to check a book out of the library." I was told to as opposed to now where But I mean, thankfully, my mom took me to a psychiatrist who was listening to this kind of incredulously and just saying, "Is your kid is he a major display? Is he like sleepwalking or like threatening to kill you?" I was like, "No." I was like, "Well, I was bored. Put him in a different school." And that was the end of it. But I mean, certainly at both schools, even at the sort of more gulag kind of school that I was subsequently put into, even there was always teachers with guitars walk around because the older generation their music was such an important part of them, and they were always making sure it was part of our ethos as well, as part of our culture. But we grew up with it, understanding that people were singing about relevant, important things, and it just seeped into our content.
Right.
I don't think there was ever a point in our childhoods where that was not important, a part of our educational experience. Whereas you're right, now it's not quite as infused in the educational arena as much as it was certainly when we were growing up.
Yeah, well, when you had to either play an instrument or you had to go to glee club or you had to participate in music somehow, then you say, okay, I'll play the bass, and you learn, and then you put it to practice because the kid down the street played the guitar, and then you found this little drummer, and
right, and
then
pretty soon you were the Birds.
Right.
And then the folk masses in Catholic schools and churches. I mean, it became Sister Caritas and all the different Sister Carita, wasn't it? Our Father, she made that song very folky, and everybody followed her, and then it became folk masses, and people were going back to church to sing and dance, really, to have a little happening on the weekend.
Right, but it was even all over the mainstream. Like we had, songs like "If I Had a Hammer" were mainstream songs. These kind of empowerment songs. Exactly, it became part of a mainstream, which is it seems so different now. Where, where the mainstream doesn't quite have the same kind of sense of social.
And also, I think a lot of it has to do with the time, the political time, when the civil rights movement came to the forefront. Where, I never even knew about the Deep South as I was growing up. I was appalled to learn of what was going on. I remember going on the Hootenanny tour throughout the South because the Journeymen were on a trip through this. It was the southern lap of the Hootenanny tour, and it was an eye opener for me. I'd never seen
Segregation like
segregated water fountains and segregated restaurants and segregated liquor stores. I mean, that I didn't get that one at all.
Right, yeah, it's, not be inclusive in our vices. Keep them apart. I just want to talk a little bit maybe about the screenplay that you guys have written together. You guys have written a script for an upcoming biopic about the Mamas and Papas. It seems like such a tailor-made fit for a movie, especially given how bardic the music was and how story-based so much of it was. But because your songs are so storytelling tradition, and the band itself, it's had quite a fair amount of drama, on the forefront behind the scenes. Can you both maybe discuss some of the challenges you guys face is some of what you feel worked to your advantage in mining the cinematic core at the root of the story, the mamas and papas.
Want to answer that?
It's your story,
Well,
darling.
all I can say is that you will never see in our movie anyone breaking into song in the middle of a scene. All the music is.
The great part of the music is it tells the story.
Right.
Because they were writing spontaneously through their experiences. And they were kids. You know, Michelle was 17 when she met John. You have to keep in mind.
My daughter's
The
17.
oldest they right.
What family is it in?
The oldest you know, John was 9 years older, right? He was 35, right? Yeah.
26.
1935. 1935,
He-
right? So
he was
would
born in
be how old?
36.
Oh, 36? Oh, I don't even remember exactly, but
36, I think?
so he was 9 years older or 10 years older than you, but Cass was 3 years old, only 3 years older than you, and Daddy was only 3. So they were in their early 20s. They were kids. Think about the responsibility. Think about what they were doing. They were working, grueling in the studio, especially with Lou Adler at Dunhill. I mean, and John was a taskmaster. I mean, everything
He was
had to
the
be
devil.
perfect pitch. I mean, Cass in one line, she was calling him Harmony Hitler.
Oh my
Because
God.
Oh my
he
God.
was he made them go over and over and over, take after take after take. I mean, it just was torturous. How
When-
many hours they spent.
When we would be perfectly happy with the take, and we'd go, oh, well, we got it, John. He'd say, no, we don't have it. We're going to do it again. We'd say, what?
There was
We
no
didn't-
auto tune, you know. It
Right.
was like, you know, and they just did it
And
until they got it perfect, and they could hear Harold, which they always made fun of this, you know. And if
It's
you've
like a
ever
harmonic.
sang, it's this extra buzz that you get. It's this magical harmony that just is like that thing when you're in the zone, right? When you
Yeah.
describe it like
yeah. So, you know, it was a lot of hard work, but John always pressed us further and further, and he was always right. He was always right. It was great that we did that extra take, because that was the take.
That was the one that would.
Yeah.
And then they had to get used to hearing playback of themselves, which was even more incredible.
It was fun, because when we met Lou Adler, we had never heard ourselves other than with, you know, singing with one guitar. And all of a sudden, Hal Blaine and Larry Knechtel and Joe Osborne were in there playing.
The Wrecking Crew.
Yeah, it's a lot of.
And you know, John would go in there and say, okay, you have to sing the song for them, and we'd go in and sing the song with one guitar, and then all of a sudden, Hal Blaine would start doing a little drum thing, and Larry Knechtel would start playing piano, and Hal Blaine would start a bass line, and it was like, oh my God, we're great.
So suffice it to say, will there be any whiplash moments in your script that are kind of the same kind of exacting, you know, where everybody in the audience is watching and just even though we know it's at the service of something obviously
Short.
Short.
I mean, there's really, the script is very funny, and there's a lot of drama in it, but it's still very, very funny, because in fact, the group was funny. Cass was hilarious.
It was a happy time.
Right.
Denny and Cass were like Laurel and Hardy. They joked around constantly. Actually, you kind of hear their banter sometimes. They kept, Lou would keep the
Would
whatever
keep the
sound on, so you could hear
singing
them
it.
talking to each other. They had this, what was the group that they would, the radio show that they used to imitate?
It wasn't a radio show. It was Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. They were imitating these old black Southern blues singers, and they created a language that was what we would call today Ebonics, but it was very funny and very, and that's how they spoke to each other all the time.
Their own language they made it for sure.
Yeah, with the pup. What you do with it?
Do those recordings still exist to the best of your knowledge? Are there any of those
Oh, there's,
floating around?
you know, at the end of Dancing in the Streets, you can hear them speaking in their language.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've not sat and listened to that, also I have to. It's amazing too, because the film business was, in addition to obviously what was happening in music, the film business was also very much at zenith. This is when American cinema, mainstream cinema, was putting out Dog Day Afternoon and The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2. And I mean,
Yeah, that was later.
A few years after you guys.
No,
but
we were
you guys,
watching
Easy Rider was,
European.
huh? You guys were watching European. But I mean,
Easy
really,
Rider, one of the worst
Sorry.
movies ever made.
Ever made. but spawned a revolution that creates some of the best movies ever made. But I mean, how do you? I mean, if you guys could maybe speak to, since you have some opinions on it, could you speak to maybe what both your takes are about the film industry then and now in terms of how you see what you're writing, but you're writing a movie about that takes place in that era. What are your thoughts on vis-a-vis where film was then when it was starting to really kind of and versus now in terms of what you see?
You know, if we're talking about commercial films, you know,
Well, if you're writing for the marketplace, right away you have these parameters. And I don't think we wrote from the marketplace, we wrote from the story.
Right.
And, you
That's a
know,
really good point.
and at the time, I mean, our first draft was John was still alive, Denny was still alive, so a lot of actually I got more information from the people that were the bomber, who was part of the crew that broke down everything and set everything up.
They were called road managers.
Road manager. The road manager had so much of the 411. I can't even explain. I mean, because he saw all the stuff that was going on in a different way.
Right. Yeah, different vantage point on all of you guys.
So it was so cool to get all the different interviews from everybody, the families, everyone was very open, and it was just such a fun time. I mean, it really wasn't a downer.
You know, I think that the movie experience is so different today. It's all really stupid comedies,
Contrived and
comedies,
canned.
very thematic and they're not
Big risk takers.
they're not well written.
Right.
They are.
It's like no time limits kind of fun.
Right.
There's nothing organic, like you can just, there are, I shouldn't say
But
that, but you have
but
to.
you know, look, I think we were very much influenced by European filmmakers at the time. I mean, when you went to the movies, you went to see Fellini and you went to see films like The 400 Blows and The Bicycle Thief and the just wonderful films that.
Harold and Maude.
Yeah.
Well, you make an excellent point that we were taking our cues from the Europeans. Certainly, when Robert Benton and David Newman wrote Bonnie and Clyde, it came from their take on they wanted to write, an American story as filtered through the eyes of the Europeans. They felt would tell the story. It would be bloody and anti-heroic and not necessarily conventional. And there were still films like Paint Your Wagon. There were some pretty bad films coming out of the studios for sure at the time. But it just seemed like then we allowed the global perspective to filter into our own, as opposed to now where I think we'll take the filmmakers from and have them do our superhero movies, but not necessarily filter their sensibilities into our American stories so much. That's my take on it, I would say.
It's like more of a folk story.
Right. They'll say, okay, good. Here's a
culture.
fantastic, South American director. Let's bring him to do the next, not the next Avengers movie, but something on that order. Versus saying, here's a sensibility that we can bring into a distinctly American story, and make that distinctly American story something a little bit strange, unusual, and yet without losing its organic American base. To your point, you're right. We were right. That it's amazing that kind of filmmaking was, global filmmaking is actually informing our stories here.
Yeah.
So hopefully, well, depending on how your film turns out, what stage are you guys at with it?
We just
Square
finished.
one
We
again.
just finished writing it.
Wow.
This is about our fifth draft.
I can't keep up. But it's
we-
evolved as we've evolved. I think I was in my 20s in our first rough draft.
Yeah.
So I'm an old lady now, so I've actually learned a lot more to inform the story. And Michelle has remembered things, and we've had wonderful people bring us time capsules of information from this wonderful woman from Boston. She spent her whole life collecting clippings of every single thing that happened to mamas and papas all around the world. And we got that library, and there were things that even Cass, Elliot's daughter, Owen, never had even seen.
There were things that I
interviews
had
with Cass
never
that were
seen.
so funny and so fun.
So we just,
It just-
said, okay, this has got to be a scene.
Treasure.
Wow.
And so that was so much fun, writing from actual interviews. People actually said these
Raw
things.
interviews too, really
Yeah.
off the cuff fun, anecdotal things
And
that
it
she
really,
said.
it really,
It's amazing.
it really, it was Cass Cass talking, the way that she talked, the things that she would,
She narrates too. We
Yeah.
have her in and out of the narration portion of the movie.
yeah, she's the perfect narrator for the
Omniscient
story.
narrator.
Because she
yeah.
narrates from the grave, yeah.
Wow, that sounds like a real, it's a really special, and of course, to have somebody as colorful, and incredibly vivacious, force of nature from. I'll tell you what I've read. Just to have that as a character in your movie, it's a movie star. Is like just who would want to play her? Last question before I turn over to some questions here from the audience. It seems to me every generation has its take on our city's many points of evolution. From its birth as something of a pueblo of ill repute, to the Mickey Cohen corruption era, to the Eagles offering their perspective of ruination and the last resort, which I argue was probably never quite so innocent as I think they wanted to make it seem in 1976. But as someone who's sang one of the region's most iconic songs, how do you feel Los Angeles has changed for the better as well as for the worse since the 1970s and 60s and 70s?
It's pretty much the same.
Fair to say?
Yeah.
More traffic?
Yeah.
Less smog?
Less smog, that's for sure.
Less smog.
It still attracts a bunch of weirdos. And it attracts people who want to write, and it attracts a lot of artists and
A lot of gold miners.
and gold
Still.
diggers.
And but reinventors too, right? I mean, people try
Yeah.
hoping to see
Creative
this as
spirits.
to see this as a place to reshape their own narrative, as opposed, I think, where you're from the East Coast. I went to college on the East Coast. There's a lot of people who feel very trapped in established generational tones that kind of attrition, the tropes that they can't quite escape. So
Right.
we
Well,
come here
that's-
to bust out.
That's what California, that's what the lyric of California Dreaming is all about. It's about getting out from under 10 feet of snow in Michigan or something. I can't tell you how many people have just come up to me and said, I just have to tell you that I used to live in Cleveland, and I was an accountant I was an accountant's assistant in Cleveland, and then I heard California Dreamin'.
So many people.
And here I am.
And I
So
got
many
into my
people.
car, I left my wife, and I got in my car and came to California, and now I'm the vice president of Atlantic Records.
First thing Peter Weir said to us was, I remember the first time I heard California Dreaming.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right, it is-
someone
it's
so
that
cool like
seminal
that.
song,
It's just
Yeah, it's
so
kind of
cool.
the city, I think, is a place where you can start new. You can start fresh, and that's what John and I were writing about when he woke me up in the middle of the night and helped me listen to this, and he played me the first 8 bars of the song, and I said, great, honey. And he said, no, wake up, help me write this. And he said, you'll thank me for this someday. And so we got up and wrote it. And it was really the story of Michelle wanting to go home so badly. I'd had enough of the East Coast. I hated the East Coast. I wanted to go back to the sun and you know, the crazy people and you know, the swimming pools and the beach and
Palm trees.
and palm trees, and I just wanted to come home, and that's what John had started to write when he woke me up.
I remember living on the East Coast when I first got there. I knew I'd made a colossal mistake when somebody asked me, "Oh, you're from California. When do they close the beaches down there?" I said, "What? What time of the year do they close the beaches?" I said, "They don't ever close the beaches. What's the matter with you? They close the beaches when they close them." I said, even if it was freezing, like I'd die of hypothermia, just like I still don't know that it's an option. I think that look, it's amazing to have been part of a song that wasn't just again attitude changing, but life changing.
Yeah.
It's shape-shifting, incredible. Well, let's take some questions from the people who are here and hear their thoughts. Yes, sir.
Who would be your ideal cast for the film?
Well, the problem with even thinking about that is that we have a very small window age-wise. And also, the character of Michelle has to be believable as 17. You can't take a 26-year-old and cast her. It has to be someone who is 17 or 18. It must be that, especially the way that we have written this script. And John, you have a little more leeway with, because he is older and he always looked older too. But Cass, you have to believe that we did these things, and you know that we've had to have been really young and crazy to do them. And you can't take older actors and just make them younger because you say they're younger.
Because they're making those mistakes that young people make. And they're also becoming rich hippies. And it's just a crazy juxtaposition. And it's tough growing up like this, because they are actually much like young actors. You know, it's a
I mean, we're
tough
growing up.
here.
We're growing up in front of the camera.
Exactly.
It's, you know, kind of the, you know, boyhood of the 60s. You know, you have to see the development of these characters, and really the character, my character goes from 17 to what, 24,
Yeah.
23.
Yeah.
17 to 23. It's a
Because
very short period. You know, the
Monterey
Monterey
Pop. Monterey Pop's the last part of the movie. So.
and the group was only together for 2.5 years. And
So it's a little bubble.
Wow.
A very tiny bubble.
yeah.
But you're right, you can't start a 23-year-old there and say, "Oh, we'll start at 23," and just gotta go. You have to see, it's a pretty big age span, and watch those really raw years.
You have to understand what my father felt when at 17, John and I came to him and said, "Let her go." When John said, "Let her come with me to New York." And my father said, "She hasn't even finished high school yet." And you have to believe that. You have to be able to look at me, and my father just aghast, but letting me go, because he knew that I would probably go anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Blessing or not.
And you have to also understand Cass's innocence and
she wanted a Broadway career, really.
Yeah, she
wanted
didn't want
a
anything
solo
to do
career.
with-
She really was a show tune
She's
gal.
Ethel Merman.
She was a
Yeah.
very,
Yeah,
very
exactly.
and that's
broad,
And
she
had the
wanted
personality,
a
yeah.
beautiful singer, you know, with a great contralto range,
And presence,
Just
and the right
powerful.
presence to fill a Broadway house.
Powerful
Absolutely.
voice.
I mean, she was really only with us because she was in love with the tenor. And that gave her access to Denny. So, but she was.
And
so-
Denny was really cute. He was like the Zac Efron of the
Yeah.
really hot guy.
Yeah,
He was cute.
Yeah, he was beautiful, and with the just most gorgeous tenor voice that you ever heard, and he was a babe.
Let's start some more questions here.
No one?
No one has any other questions?
China doesn't have a granddaughter to play yet?
Well, yeah, actually, if we don't cast this for a few years, I can use my youngest granddaughter. She would be perfect.
Oh, I'm a good casting director.
Are you?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Brooke is only 9.
Yeah, she's too
Oh,
young.
man.
She's 10.
But by the you never know.
Oh, by
by
the
the
time you
Well,
time
you
get
guys
May.
have been working on this since China was going to play the role, too.
Oh, yeah,
so-
we've been
China
working
was
on it a long
definitely
time.
scheduled to play the role until she was much too old. And then we were looking at Jennifer Lawrence when Jennifer Lawrence was just really young. We were saying, God, she would be great. But now Jennifer's too old. Now, so you can't get your heart set on an actor.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's so many wonderful young actors. It would be so great to find some
So unknown,
wonderful, unknown, fabulous kids.
And the great thing about playing people like you guys, where you're such icons, is that you don't have to have an actor who has to be bigger than the role. You know, the character is so big.
Right.
Let them grow into it and let us discover who they are as they put their unique stamp on this incredible character. And let us see them vulnerable as a 17-year-old.
Let's see
going
if
their
Hollywood
Yeah.
will let us do that.
Let's see if, well, that's
Good luck with that one.
that's a bigger question. Yeah, yeah. Good luck with that indeed. Yes, sir.
The mamas and papas were really, a product, as you were saying with John, of the old sort of music industry where there was a very strong sort of pipeline and infrastructure set up to sort of nurture talent and bring it through and all. What do you think of the changes where the music industry has become sort of a small d, more democratic thing with YouTube and whatnot, where, you don't have to necessarily go through that route to be discovered to nurture your talent?
That's a very good question because I think that in many cases it's more about stardom than about talent. It's more it's more about developing a brand or it's not really about necessarily how well they write, how well they sing, how well their music is arranged. That's very old school now, and this movie will be a real glimpse into that period where that's what you had to do, and you had to sing in tune. A frightening prospect for me, in particular. And I mean, I had to really struggle and learn how to, to sing. But as John used to say, anybody can sing. You just have to practice. But now you can take someone who is not singing in tune. You just take that little dial and you dial
Or
them up,
flat, or
and
they're
all of a
flat
sudden,
and they don't
or
have-
they're
they
they're
don't
flat,
have
they're
pitch.
sharp. We can fix that. And I don't want to say that it's not as good. I mean, if you can, I wish they'd had it when I was singing. I have a very big pitch problem, but I was forced to overcome it, and there was something beautiful about listening to a playback of something that you never ever thought you could do, but you did. And it was this real sense of accomplishment.
I just remember, I mean, I remember when I was watching one of my daughters, she was watching a Nickelodeon show called Big Time Rush. It was one of these shows about this band and how they actually had a song called You Want to Be Famous. It wasn't like the song was a means to become famous. The whole point of the song was about fame. It had nothing to do with any substance that was, okay, because we found this great song, that's going to make us famous. No, our whole point was to be famous without any substance behind it. I just thought that was it's wholly emblematic of what you were just what you were talking about. Really.
Yeah, I did not want to be famous. I didn't want to perform. And really, John just insisted that I do, because his logic was that it was the only way we could rationalize my expenses on the road.
And you could keep an eye on her.
So, yes.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt.
Yes, go ahead.
A question that kind of goes along with this question is, I just so grew up with the process was the music was copyrighted, it was yours. People had to get permission to use it, or, you know, there was all the rules, and now it just seems like people constantly they don't even think about taking it, recording it, using it, whatever. How do you feel, what do you feel about what's going on? It's hard for me. I don't know how it is for you.
You know, it's interesting, but I called Hal Blaine, who was our drummer, and Hal Blaine is probably the most famous drummer in the world. And I asked him how he felt about the Marvin Gaye, Pharrell,
Robin Thicke
thing. He said, well, he says it's there are thousands of different little drum riffs. He said they've been used over and over and over again. Really, the blurred lines came down to the drum riff, which was identical to the Marvin Gaye songs, and that's where they got them. And also, Thicke talking about, we were really channeling Marvin Gaye. That he could have kept himself. But you know, throughout history, people have imitated other music and music that they're influenced by, and there are only so many notes, and there are only, you know, you can rearrange. You know, I'm not sure that I agree with with the decision, because I heard both songs, and they don't sound the same to me.
They sound like in the spirit of it, the way, you know, if you listen to Sheryl Crow's "All I Want to Do" and you listen to "Stuck in the Middle," it has the same kind of arrangement spirit, but it's not the same song. And in mathematically speaking, it's not the same. There's not enough overlap.
Yeah, but with George Harrison's
My
Sweet Lord, that was I think an unconscious, he stole it.
Yeah.
But I think he did it unconsciously. I really do. I mean, John Phillips woke me up one morning and said, listen to what I wrote last night. And he had been up all night writing this song. And I looked at him after he sang it for me, and I said, John, you've just spent the entire night writing Autumn Leaves. And I said, you're right. So it happens on a very unconscious level. I won't tell you which song this was, but we were short a track on one album, and we didn't have the material, we didn't know what to do. So we had done a cover of a song that we weren't going to use on the album, so John took all the lyrics off of it, and we had this beautiful track, and he wrote another song to the track. Now the track was actually to another song. I don't know. The reason I'm not telling you what song it is because I don't want them coming after us for that publishing.
Right.
But it was just exactly the same track for another song, to a song that was written by somebody else. But it was and really I guess you can't really copyright a track. We're not singing the same melody on it, but the track was great.
Herb Alpert of the Tijuana Brass came to my sweet 16th birthday party. I grew up in West Hollywood. My mother worked in a Hollywood professional school and grew up with movie stars. What I'm wondering is, he's still known and famous. There's a building after him, and the Beatles are still known. What are some of the qualities that make a musician last?
Well, first of all, they shouldn't die. They should be able to go out and do things and show up places. And it helps if you can be a philanthropist. Ask David Geffen. You know, the Tijuana Brass, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass were unique. Really.
And I knew him in high school when I was 16.
Yeah, I mean they had something really great going, and there were not a bunch of groups out there. Kid? Oh, Kid. Who did the song Tequila?
What's that?
Tequila. Da, 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 da.
The Champs. Yes, the
Okay.
Champs.
So the Champs were kind of that in that group, you know. They weren't really vocalists, but they were.
They had a big band.
They had a
feeling,
band.
and the brass section
Yeah.
was heavy.
And all they had to
Really
do was
cool.
Tequila.
My husband liked that one.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a huge hit.
Yeah, it
It
still
was a
still
huge
goes
hit.
over well in fraternity houses all over.
And Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass had pretty much that same kind of appeal. You know, they were great musicians, and that's what they were selling. They were selling that musicianship. And Herb was smart enough to form a label, A&M, with Jerry Moss, and that became A&M. And they got so rich off of that label.
They
Sold
That-
the polygram.
They sold it, yeah.
They sold it to Polygram?
Yeah, for $300 million.
So,
Yeah, so that was a nice little
excellent.
turnover there. But he had a very, very good business sense, Herbie and Jerry Moss. And, you know, they weren't just in it for the music, they were in it for
the business.
for the business too. And that's true of Geffen, you know. Geffen had a great ear for people, but he was a great businessman, and he was also very fair. He
Oh yeah, he did some really cool things, really
Yeah.
wonderful things for other artists, and
yeah.
will protect them.
That's why Asylum Records was called Asylum for that reason.
Wonderful
Right.
thing. It's good karma there.
Yeah.
There's so many great mamas and papas songs, and what's really cool about your group is that they don't all sound the same. They all have a kind of a different vibe going on. For instance, Words of Love to me always had kind of it's interesting what you mentioned about Mama Cass really wanting to pursue Broadway, because it has a little bit of a Broadway thing going on
It
underneath
sure does.
the.
Yeah.
So how did that song come about?
John and I had broken up. We were breaking up and getting back together, and also I have to tell you that almost all of our songs were written about our experiences. I mean, that's how people write songs. They write about their own experiences.
Turn tragedy into publishing.
Yeah.
That's what Johnny's design.
Yeah. And he really did feel that when we were having problems, if he could say, "Do you want to go to Europe?" They say, "Oh, honey, that sounds like such a great idea." And words of love so soft and tender won't win a girl's heart anymore. If you love her, then you must send her somewhere where she's never been before. And so that's what that song was about. And it was Cass's song. She just nailed it. She nailed it on the first take.
Yeah, we have a very special scene
Uh-huh.
with that song.
Wow.
We don't play a lot of the songs through.
That's one of the
But
songs.
that's one of the
All the
songs
way
we,
through.
and she, one take, and she honestly did it in one take. She did it in one take.
John and Lou in shaping the sound, did they fight? Did Lou Adler have a lot of say on the overall sound, or was it John's ship and Lou just kind of?
John and Lou never fought.
Really?
They were like brothers. They were thrown together. It could not have been a more beautiful marriage of John's talent and Lou's talent. Lou had already produced, he had produced Barry Maguire, and it was just coming up off of Eve of Destruction. He produced Johnny Rivers. He produced God, he just produced, he knew all the musicians that we needed. I mean, he had all those
They used to
people.
call him the fifth mama.
Yeah.
'Cause he was, and they'd call him Uncle Lou.
So it wasn't a lot of conflict? Like
There
a
was no
Phil
conflict
Spector
at all,
type
and
of-
John learned everything about the board
And he took care of them.
from Lou, and Lou was very intuitive. He would, if we were having a problem, we could be working in the studio and not be able to get a song right. It was just, there's something wrong with it. And we might spend 2 or 3 hours in there trying to fix it. And Lou would come out and he'd say, "John, come here. What if you put the second verse after the bridge and do the bridge first, and then come back and do the first verse again, and then the instrumental, and you're out."
Lou tune.
Louis tunes. And John would say, "We're gonna try it," and it would be perfect. I mean, Lou had a sense about what was commercial, what sold, how you got it to be commercial, and so it was a very symbiotic relationship that was magic, really. You couldn't have put two guys together who worked more harmoniously than the two of them.
Well, I thought we would actually do a little sign now, but thank you, Michelle, Robin. I mean, this has really been incredible and informative. And thank you guys for coming.